In the summer of 1881, a photograph was taken that should never have been seen by anyone outside a locked drawer. At first glance, it seems ordinary. Two men posed in a studio, one seated in an ornate chair, the other standing beside him. But the seated figure was no prince, no nobleman, no dignitary of state. He was a young Hungarian actor, little known beyond the stage of Munich. And the man standing, slightly stooped, hands folded as though awaiting instruction, was Ludwig II, King of Bavaria. One of Europe's crowned monarchs reduced, in this single frame, to the posture of a servant. In a world where symbolism was as important as law, this was nothing less than a scandal carved into silver nitrate. A king never stands while a commoner sits. Every rule of court etiquette, every centuries-old hierarchy of blood and crown, had been overturned in the space of a second's exposure. When copies of the photograph reached Munich, ministers who saw it understood at once what it revealed. This was not a careless pose or an innocent misstep. It was proof, visual, undeniable, of a dangerous intimacy. For nearly 20 years, Ludwig had hidden his private life behind thick walls and thicker curtains. Now, a single careless moment with a photographer had betrayed him. The reaction was swift and silent. No public condemnation, no immediate outcry. Instead, whispers moved through the gilded halls of Munich, spreading like candlelight on spilled oil. This was not just a breach of protocol. It was the revelation of a truth that had been carefully concealed for decades, that the King of Bavaria loved in ways his kingdom could not accept. That in the darkness of his castles, he had built a secret world for himself, a shadow court where companionship meant more than alliances, and where passion ran against the grain of dynastic duty. The photograph would become the first domino in a chain of conspiracies, a trigger that would end with two bodies floating in the shallows of Lake Starnberg 5 years later. One body belonged to Dr. Bernhard von Gudden, Bavaria's most respected psychiatrist. The other, of course, was Ludwig himself. His watch stopped at 6:54 p.m., his lungs mysteriously free of water. A fisherman who found them would be paid handsomely for his silence and elevated to mayor of his village, while the Bavarian government locked away the documents of that night, documents still classified to this day. But to understand how the king of fairy-tale castles became a corpse in the reeds, one has to understand the man behind the scandalous photograph. You know Ludwig already, though perhaps not by name. Millions every year make the pilgrimage to see his castles. Neuschwanstein, the dreamlike fortress perched on a Bavarian cliff. 6 million tourists walk its halls annually, admiring the swan motifs and painted ceilings, snapping pictures that will appear on postcards and Instagram feeds. It is, famously, the model for Disney's Sleeping Beauty castle. Guides call it the creation of the Mad King, a ruinously expensive folly built by an eccentric monarch who bankrupted his country. That is the surface story, the one Bavaria tells to tourists. But what those guides never say is that every spire, every tower, every secret passage in those castles was built for a reason, and that reason was concealment. Neuschwanstein was less a palace than a labyrinth designed for privacy. Hidden corridors allowed servants to appear and disappear unseen. Bedrooms could be connected or divided with sliding doors. Even the throne room was missing its throne, as if Ludwig never intended to rule from it at all. The entire structure was a mask, a grand theatrical stage for a man who lived half his life pretending and half his life hiding. What forced him into that dual existence? Why would a monarch with the power of armies and the wealth of a kingdom choose to turn night into day, sleeping while his ministers governed in the light, and awakening only when darkness fell? The answer begins not with the photograph in 1881, but nearly 20 years earlier, in the quiet rooms of Munich's residence palace. There, in 1863, the 18-year-old prince met a man who would awaken a longing he could neither suppress nor publicly acknowledge. That meeting, unrecorded in the official histories but immortalized in letters that somehow escaped the fire, marked the beginning of Ludwig's secret life, a life of midnight meetings, hidden correspondence, and castles built not for politics but for love. It was the discovery that in darkness, he could finally live as himself. And it was the beginning of a path that would lead, inexorably, to betrayal, deposition, and death in the shallows of Lake Starnberg. Munich, 1863. The Bavarian court was alive with the glitter of chandeliers and the rustle of silk gowns when the 18-year-old Crown Prince Ludwig first saw him. Paul von Thurn und Taxis, young, handsome, and adorned with the uniform of an aide-de-camp, stepped into the residence like a figure painted by the hand of destiny. Ludwig had seen beautiful men before. The Bavarian nobility was full of polished sons with soldierly posture. But Paul was different. When their eyes met across the throne room, there was something dangerous in the silence that followed. In an age when every gesture carried meaning, Ludwig's attention did not go unnoticed. Within weeks, Paul was slipping quietly into the prince's private chambers at night. Servants whispered about footsteps in the corridors long after the court had retired. Their official letters, kept neat and formal for the record, spoke of military duties and court business. But hidden in the archives, in envelopes someone forgot to burn, were others. "My heart beats only for you," Paul wrote. "I am consecrated to you, body and soul." Ludwig replied with an intensity that alarmed even his later biographers. "You are the sun in my darkness. When you are away, I cannot eat, cannot sleep. I pace my chambers like a caged animal until you return." For Ludwig, this was not simply infatuation, it was revelation. In Paul's company, he discovered that his desires, so long smothered beneath the weight of Catholic piety and dynastic expectation, had a shape, a name, a face. But Bavaria in 1863 had no safe vocabulary for such things. At best, there were euphemisms. At worst, there were accusations of sin, degeneracy, or madness. The court whispered. Ministers took notes. And within 6 months, the rumors had spread from palace corridors to the beer halls of Munich. The uncrowned prince, they said, preferred the company of his aide-de-camp to that of the princesses paraded before him. Something had to be done. His mother, Queen Marie, was the first to act. She summoned Paul to a private audience. What words passed between them will never be known. The records are silent. But that very night, Paul left Bavaria for a sudden posting in Prussia. He would never return. The blow nearly crushed Ludwig. His first taste of love ended in exile, leaving him pacing his rooms alone, staring at the empty space where Paul's shadow once lingered. The lesson was brutal and clear. For him, love would always mean loss. But it was not the only transformation that took root in those months of grief. At first, courtiers noticed small irregularities. The prince missed a morning meeting here, arrived late to an afternoon council there. Then, gradually, his schedule shifted further into the evening. By winter, it was remarked upon openly. The crown prince was rarely seen before sunset. His Highness, one minister wrote, seems to have developed an aversion to daylight itself. They called it melancholy, the natural sorrow of a young man heartbroken. And in part they were right. But beneath the grief was a discovery Ludwig would cling to for the rest of his life. In darkness, he could finally live without disguise. When daylight pressed upon him, Ludwig wore the mask of the perfect heir, dutiful son, future monarch, a man who would marry and secure the Wittelsbach dynasty. But when the sun went down and society slept, he felt the mask slide away. In those hours of candlelight and shadows, he could be himself, however briefly. What began as a habit of grieving became a way of life. Then, in March of 1864, tragedy and responsibility collided. Ludwig's father, King Maximilian II, died suddenly. At just 18 years old, Ludwig ascended the throne. The crown weighed only 3.5 pounds, but to Ludwig it was crushing. Now he was no longer simply expected to hide who he was. He was expected to marry, to produce heirs, to embody the survival of a dynasty more than 7 centuries old. The court tried to help him. Ministers paraded princesses before him, women of beauty and refinement whose marriages would bind Bavaria to Austria or Saxony. In 1867, to great celebration, Ludwig became engaged to Princess Sophie, sister of the celebrated Empress Elizabeth of Austria. Sophie was everything a Bavarian queen should be: intelligent, poised, admired throughout Europe. The wedding was set for August 25, Ludwig's birthday. Invitations went out across the continent. And then, one by one, the dates slipped away. August became September, September became October. Twice he postponed, offering no explanation. Finally, he summoned Sophie to a private meeting. According to her later memoirs, Ludwig looked her in the eyes and spoke with a sorrow she never forgot. "I cannot do this to you," he said. "You deserve a husband who can love you completely. I am not that man. I will never be that man." The engagement was broken. Remarkably, Sophie seemed to understand. She never married, living out her life in quiet resignation. "How could I," she once said, "after being loved by Ludwig?" But she was mistaken. Ludwig had not truly loved her. At the very moment he broke their engagement, his heart was already drawn elsewhere. This time, to a man whose place at court was so lowly that Ludwig believed no one would suspect. Richard Hornig first entered Ludwig's life not through the glittering ballrooms of Munich, but through the stables. He was a groom, young, blonde, blue-eyed, with features so classically sculpted he might have stepped out of a Greco-Roman statue. His position was humble, his hands rough with the work of brushing down horses and tightening saddles. And perhaps that was what drew Ludwig. Where Paul von Thurn-Uendi Taxis had been a fellow aristocrat, a dangerous equal in the eyes of the court, Hornig was safely beneath suspicion. To the world, he was just another servant. To Ludwig, he was something far more. By 1866, Hornig was no longer merely a groom. He had been promoted to master of the horse, then to personal equerry. The promotions came quickly, suspiciously quickly to anyone paying attention. Ludwig gave him property by the lake, a generous annual stipend, and, most telling of all, free access to the king's private chambers. Their bond was more than loyalty. In the pages of Ludwig's diary, discovered only after his death, Hornig appears under the name Die Geliebte Männerseele, the beloved of my soul. Yet in the very next entries, the king's tone shifts. Confessions of passion give way to prayers for forgiveness, self-flagellation, and promises to God that he would resist temptation. "I am damned," Ludwig wrote in 1869. "But damnation with him is sweeter than salvation alone." That war between faith and desire, between public duty and private longing, tore at him. And it was during this period of turmoil that Ludwig made the decision that would forever define him. He would build a castle, not a palace of governance, but a fortress of fantasy. Perched on a cliff so steep it seemed to defy gravity, Neuschwanstein rose like a dream of the Middle Ages painted onto the Bavarian Alps. Its towers stretched toward the clouds, its halls glowed with murals of swans and saints. But beneath its fairy tale beauty lay a secret purpose. Every corridor, every chamber, every hidden door was designed with privacy in mind. Secret staircases allowed Ludwig to move unseen. Concealed passageways let servants come and go without ever appearing before him. Even the throne room, adorned with Byzantine mosaics of kings and angels, lacked one crucial thing: the throne itself. Ludwig never intended to hold court there. Neuschwanstein was not a seat of power. It was a sanctuary for secrets. Historians long puzzled over Ludwig's obsession with such impractical grandeur. They called it eccentricity, megalomania, madness. But in truth, Neuschwanstein was less a folly than a mask, stone and mortar arranged to shield him from the gaze of the world. It was the stage upon which he could act out the life he could never live in daylight. And Neuschwanstein was only the beginning. At Linderhof, Ludwig ordered the construction of a marvel that even his closest ministers could not explain, the Venus Grotto. From the outside, it appeared to be a mere artificial cave, a curiosity for a king with extravagant tastes. But within, it was a theater of desire. 90 meters long, with a lake warmed to a precise 28 degrees Celsius, it shimmered beneath electric lights, Germany's first private power station built for a single man's pleasure. Mechanical waves lapped gently at the golden shell-shaped boat, where Ludwig reclined with his chosen companion of the night. Musicians hidden behind painted rocks played Wagner's operas. With the flick of a switch, the grotto could become the red-lit Venusberg of Tannhauser, the blue grotto of Capri, or sink into absolute darkness should uninvited eyes draw near. Tourist guides today speak of the grotto as a tribute to Wagner's music. They point out its novelty, its technological ingenuity. But what they do not say is that it was a carefully controlled environment where Ludwig could enact fantasies impossible in the light of day. It was an underground kingdom where beauty and secrecy danced together, where electricity itself bent to the service of concealment. Those who served him in this nocturnal world were chosen with great care and rewarded lavishly. But no amount of money could fully silence gossip. By the late 1870s, troubling rumors began reaching the ears of Bavaria's ministers. Valets and servants dismissed from Ludwig's service whispered of strange rituals in candlelit halls. One bitter former valet described scenes meant to discredit the king forever. Young men chosen for their beauty commanded to dance wearing nothing but garlands of flowers, while Ludwig watched with fevered eyes, occasionally beckoning one forward to whisper something private. Whether these tales were true or exaggerated, they fed the perception of a monarch slipping further from reason. What had begun as eccentricity now sounded like degeneracy. The shadow kingdom Ludwig had built for himself, populated by actors, musicians, servants and lovers, was no longer invisible. It was beginning to bleed into daylight, and with it came danger. By 1881, that danger would crystallize in one man, Joseph Keynes, the young actor whose presence in Ludwig's life would undo the delicate balance of secrecy. And with him came the photograph that sealed the king's fate. By 1881, Ludwig's world was already fraying. The extravagant castles had drained the treasury, ministers grew impatient with his nocturnal governance, and rumors of indecency darkened the corridors of Munich. Then came Joseph Keynes. Keynes was a promising young actor, handsome, ambitious, and only 23 when Ludwig first saw him perform. His talent was modest, but something in his presence seized the king's attention. Within weeks, Keynes was not merely a performer in Ludwig's shadow kingdom, but a companion. Their intimacy was no longer confined to secret letters or midnight corridors. Ludwig, reckless with infatuation, invited Keynes on a journey to Switzerland. Traveling under an alias, he permitted a photographer to take their portrait. That single photograph, Ludwig standing while Keynes sat with casual ease, was more than a breach of etiquette. It was proof. The carefully maintained illusion of royal dignity collapsed in one flash of the camera. When copies reached Munich, Ludwig's enemies had the weapon they needed. Count Maximilian von Hohenstein, once a confidant, began collecting evidence. Testimonies from dismissed servants, records of gifts bestowed upon male companions, even stolen diary entries where Ludwig's most private words, pleas to God, confessions of love, were twisted into signs of degeneracy. Still, mere scandal would not suffice. Bavaria could stomach eccentricity. It could even tolerate hidden liaisons, so long as they remained hidden. To dethrone a king, something stronger was required. That is when Dr. Bernhard von Gudden entered the story. Bavaria's most respected psychiatrist, Gudden had never once examined Ludwig, never spoken with him, never observed him directly. Yet in March 1886, he produced a detailed report declaring the king insane. Every eccentricity was recast as madness. His reversed sleep schedule became dementia. His castles were delusions of grandeur. His private relationships, contrary sexual instincts, proving moral insanity. The verdict was damning. But beneath the clinical language, the truth was simpler. Ludwig was not insane. He was inconvenient. His debts had soared to 14 million marks. His castles threatened the solvency of Bavaria itself. And his secret life, now perilously visible, risked dragging the entire monarchy into disrepute. The ministers acted swiftly. On June 10, 1886, Ludwig II was declared insane and unfit to rule. His uncle, Prince Luitpold, was named regent. A commission led by Dr. Gudden marched to Neuschwanstein to arrest the king. Ludwig had warning. Loyal servants begged him to flee. His cousin, Empress Elizabeth of Austria, arranged a possible escape across the border. But Ludwig hesitated. Where would a deposed king go, he asked. What life exists for a Ludwig who is no longer king of Bavaria? So he waited. At 4 a.m. on June 12, the commission found him fully dressed in his chamber, as though he had been expecting them. How can you declare me insane, Ludwig demanded of Gudden, when you have never examined me? Gudden's reply was chilling. It is unnecessary. The evidence is overwhelming. They took him to Berg Castle on Lake Starnberg. It was called a place of treatment, but in truth, it was a prison. Less than 48 hours later, Ludwig was dead. On June 13, shortly after 6:30 p.m., Ludwig and Gudden walked down to the lake. The guards, reassured by Gudden, were dismissed. The storm clouds had broken, the air was cool and heavy with the scent of rain. Hours passed. At 8 p.m., when they had not returned, search parties were sent out. What they found has never been adequately explained. Both men lay in shallow water, no more than waist deep. Gudden's face bore scratches, his neck the marks of strangulation. Ludwig floated face down, his watch stopped at 6:54. Yet no water was found in his lungs. He had not drowned. His coat, missing from the autopsy records, was rumored to have borne bullet holes. And the fisherman who found the bodies, Jacob Liddell, was rewarded handsomely, eventually becoming mayor of his small town. In his private papers, discovered long after his death, he wrote, "The king was escaping. I had a boat ready. As he waded toward me, I heard the shot. He fell into the water. I was told if I valued my family's lives, I saw nothing but 2 drowned men. Who fired that shot? Who paid for Liddell's silence? Who ensured the documents surrounding Ludwig's death remain classified by the Bavarian government even to this day? No one can say with certainty. But the truth feels close enough to touch. Ludwig was silenced not because he was powerless, but because he knew too much. For 20 years, he had gathered confidants in the darkness. Actors, servants, nobles, men who may have whispered their own secrets to him. His existence was dangerous to those who could not afford exposure. In the aftermath, the cover-up was swift. Ludwig's private papers were seized, most burned. Servants were dismissed with pensions and silence. The Venus Grotto was sealed for renovations that lasted years. Richard Hornig disappeared into obscurity, never again speaking of the king. Joseph Keynes became a celebrated actor but never performed in Bavaria. When asked about Ludwig years later, he said only, "The king was the loneliest man I ever met. He built castles in the air because the real world had no place for him." And yet, the castles remained. Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, Herrenchiemsee, the fantasies of a man condemned as insane became Bavaria's most treasured monuments. The government that deposed him discovered too late that his madness was worth a fortune. Today, Neuschwanstein alone generates tens of millions of euros annually, visited by millions. The Mad King's folly became Bavaria's greatest treasure. There is a cruel irony in that. Ludwig, who reversed his life to exist in shadows, is now one of history's most visible monarchs. Tourists photograph the towers he built to hide himself, walk through the grotto designed for secrecy, and buy postcards of the fairy tale world he created to escape judgment. They see everything, except the truth. Empress Elizabeth perhaps said it best in her diary, written days after his death. They killed him not because he was insane, but because he was free. On foggy nights, locals say, strange lights still flicker across Lake Starnberg. Not torches, not lamps, but something softer, like moonlight where no moon shines. They say it is Ludwig still reaching for that boat, still trying to escape to a world where kings can love as they choose, where night can be day, and where fairy tales can be real. The Mad King is dead. Long live the Dream King. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more untold secrets of history.